I'm very pleased to be speaking to Mr. Lazaro Campos, the CEO of SWIFT. Thank you very much for joining us today. When I speak to your member banks, the one most important question that keeps coming up in their minds today is cost and cost and cost. Mm-hmm. Until the economic crisis just last year, you were growing in every which direction. You were a happy story that had got your financial messaging standards for banking down pat, and you were growing into insurance, fund management, prime brokers, hedge funds. You're building a trade services utility and so on. Mm-hmm. Has the crisis brought some of your ambitions down?
Thank you. Anidi, I would like to say that we are still a happy story. It's a happy story. It's fair to say that the cooperative has been very successful over the last 37 years in trying to increase straight-through processing in electronic communication and financial services. Just this year is a different year. We come from a period of 15 years of double-digit growth year on year. This year, we will be ending the year at the same levels as last year. So it's a flat year. We skip a year, if you wish. And that has forced some significant change at SWIFT. Because as you quite rightly say, our members have gotten used to the yearly cycle of price reductions. In fact, by the end of 2011, we've committed to reduce by 50%. And we're still, even today, committed to that reduction. For that, obviously, we need to change. And what we're doing is changing structurally the cost base of SWIFT. We've launched a project to reduce and to increase the efficiency of the company by 30% by the end of next year. And much of that is going to help and fuel those price reductions.
Being the world's largest and almost the de facto payment messaging infrastructure, who do you benchmark yourself against on the cost front? When you say you reduce price by 50%, and who do you look at on the left and the right to come up with those numbers?
That's right. This headline story that SWIFT is a monopoly and there is no competition is a headline story. The reality is very, very different. Because as you know, we not only entertain communication in between countries, so cross-border, but very much in domestic environments. Half of our business is domestic. And in domestic environments, our customers have multiple choices. VPNs, their own networks, the banking sector in different countries have developed their own solutions, so there is significant competition. And in fact, when we talk about creating or supporting very important projects in Asia, like in Japan with JASDAC, or here HKMA, or in Singapore MAS, all of the different RTGSs of the region, of which many use SWIFT, we come every time in competition with local suppliers. So the competition is fierce, and we have to make sure that our price levels are competitive.
It's interesting that you talk about competition in that way. How then do you view some of the unintended competition that comes on? Like the Germans, for example, have just started IBEX, and you have countries like India, which has its SFMC, I think SFMS infrastructure, which is domestic, and China, is obviously intending to build its own domestic, payments network and so on. How do you view these developments, and how does SWIFT intend to sort of plug into some of these national level initiatives?
That's right. So the reason why we're interested in domestic markets is because our members are interested. So they use SWIFT for international communication, and they have the standardization, they have the systems, they have the networks connected, the SWIFT network connected to it, the security solutions. They like that. That investment works for cross-border transactions. And they say, well, why don't we use the same thing for domestic? Why do I have to then have a separate interface, a different network, a different set of standards to do something that is the continuation of my international activity? So that's how 15 years ago, we started this drive towards supporting domestic environments, and we now have 86 RTGSs and some 50 CSDs in as many countries using SWIFT, because the banks can then use the same infrastructure for both. And that makes sense. That makes economic sense. Now, that sometimes clashes, to your point, with sovereignty issues in the country, where the central bank or the central repository, they have a need for control. They want to make sure that things happen their way. And then the issue for us is, how do we bring everybody to the table, and we have a coherent discussion on what is the total cost of that implementation, not just the central bank component or the market infrastructure, but including all the different parties. And then business cases prevail.
Yeah.
When the users can't reuse, that lowers it, and we have then a much better way to go forward. Now, that is a lengthy process, and getting ourselves into those domestic environments it requires a fair amount of discussion with the local community.
Give us a sense of the kind of conversations that you have with the German regulator, for example. It used to be that SWIFT would be the open network for the world,
Yes.
and then you have very proprietary networks on the domestic front. But today, the domestic players are also, proposing open networks, basically. And it goes right down to, the networks for internet banking, for example, where, there's a need for standardized systems, originating from individual banks and working into the interbank level and then into the global front. Give us a sense of the kind of conversations that you have, say, with the German regulator on IBIX. How does SWIFT expect to, plug into IBIX, for example?
Yeah. In German regulator, which is your question, I'll never tell you what I talk to German regulators about, but if you want to know what our ambition is in low-value payments, IBIX is the standard that Germans use to exchange low-value payments.
Right.
So our ambition is that we can carry those. We don't care about whether it's IBIX or whether it's a SWIFT standard, which we have. We put all of them in a file.
Right.
So we are agnostic in the low value payments area. We are agnostic on the type of standard that the community uses. We know that the real issue for low value payments in domestic environments is price. And we believe that we have one of the most attractive price points and the more advanced functionality. So that is the type of discussion we have with German regulators or any others in terms of low value payments.
The point that you've made about the data that you collect and the fact that you make that data available, on the data front, there's also a lot of pressure on SWIFT, and the pressure comes from two sides. Your user base want more data from from the transactions that they put through you. So they want to know not just the number of transactions, they want to know the size, they want to know where it's going to, and so on, so that they can make business decisions. On the other hand, you have regulators like the US Fed who wants to see more of those information becoming transparent so that they can control that information, and the banks don't necessarily want that. Give us your sense of how you're dealing with these conflicting demands on data.
Yeah, so clearly, quite right. Transparency is headlines. Financial networks, financial matters are now very important to governments, have always been, but also when it comes to controlling in and outflows of capital into the countries. So yes, our role is basically to support our members in their reporting needs. Okay, we were talking off camera a few minutes ago. The 202 COF, for example, we have modified a message that we already have to effect a payment in between countries. We have modified it so the piece of information that is required for regulatory purposes, for control purposes, is included in the message. Right? This was done together with our members and the regulators, the ones you mentioned, and we arrived to an agreement and we implemented. So we are an instrument of making sure that those regulatory pressures, those needs for transparency, are done in an operationally sound manner and at the least cost possible. But I have news for you, the regulation and transparency is only going to increase over time. And I think people who reject the drive towards transparency is a lost battle. I think we need to manage how we do it, not if we do it.
Let's take the 202